We are the Keyboard Samurai, a podcast focused on sharing insights to help those working in cybersecurity companies, be them technology or services. Each session, your host, Will Klusovsky, aka Will Clue, sits down with professionals in our industry to illuminate topics that will help your security biz, team, or self be better. Let's hack into it now. Hey everybody, thanks for joining. Will here, and today we have a special treat with Reanna, who actually works on what we would call the client side of things and in a SOC. So I think we're going to have some interesting perspectives. So Reanna, I'll give you 20-30 seconds to tell us who you are and why we care.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do apologize. I would have closed my curtain, but just like a ray of sunshine started right when you started your intro. So it's a good day today. But yeah, my name is Reanna Schultz. I have, I would say, a very fun background, and whatever, hit me up after this and we can talk about it. But I have over 6 years of industry experience. I've mostly have been on the technical side, except for the last few years in my journey. I oversee a security operations center now. And I always say every day is a little bit different. And I actually met Will at a conference. And we hit it off. I believe our first conversation was about board games. And I was like, oh, I enjoy those too.
Oh, yeah. That works great. Yeah, it's a great icebreaker. So you work in the SOC, you manage the SOC. I think that's awesome. So as we kind of were joking about in the beginning, I think there's going to be some good perspective, because even as somebody who's worked in the security industry for 20 something years, and having sold managed security services and people in the SOC, I wasn't the person in the SOC. I just kind of assume all the magic happens and we get what we want on the outside. So I guess, with that sort of perspective, give us some thought on, or something you can tell us about, how does the SOC itself actually interact with the rest of the business? And you guys aren't just, the chuds in the basement, right?
Oh yeah. That's where they put us, is in the basement next to the janitorial supplies, They tell us to stay away from the Windex, but hey, we go crazy cleaning our screens. No, a little bit about it. People sometimes think of, what you said, right? The SOC is a little bit, we're in the shadows. We do a lot of the behind the scenes work, which there is some truth to it. But whenever someone goes, hey, how do you describe your job to someone that might not know what your job is? And I like to use the analogy, we're the first responders, right? We are the first eyes and ears to any cyber risk or cyber threats that are happening in the business. And a lot of people, typically, they might start their career in a SOC, and it's something I would recommend, not because I'm biased by working in a SOC, but if you're planning long-term investment in a company, the SOC is a great, great place, or even your service desk, because again, you're learning all the ins and outs of the business, you're meeting people, you're building those customer service, and then working in the SOC, of course, you have to deal with the incidents. And a lot of the times people, I would say, downplay those soft skills working in a SOC. Yeah, we can be technical, but at the end of the day, we are still branding the company, right? We're protecting not only data, but reputation as well. And there's been times where I've had some very difficult conversations with people that don't understand security at all. And having that ability to be transparent, but also providing solutions, can go a long, long way. And it's not a skill that you could just learn in college or a boot camp. It's something you have to put yourself out there and be networkable. And I don't know if that's a word, so don't quote me on that.
It is
networkable. it is for this podcast, but going out there and building those communication skills as well, because that's how you're gonna be able to talk in those very high stress situations.
Yeah, that's interesting. Is I hadn't really thought about it that way, where it is customer service, right? You still have it's like the help desk, but different, right? It's like, you're still being, as somebody who's spent a lot of time in front of the customers, I would always kind of pre-warn the client when they said, hey, we want to talk to the smart person. And I'm like, okay, I'll bring them out of the basement, but understand that, and I mean that in the sincerest of love to all my technical people listening, but understand they're not salespeople. They're not, customer service people. They're very technical and they're going to answer your questions, but you may not like what you hear because they're going to be very blunt and direct.
Yeah. And I worked, there was a point in my journey where I did briefly work on the, I would say, MSSP side, right? Mm-hmm. Selling security as a service to people. And it's very beneficial for a company that might not have the resources and support to maintain a whole cybersecurity department. It takes a village, essentially. And it's important, especially if you're on the sales side listening to this call. The SOC doesn't magically look at alerts in seconds to help make a determination, right? When you're selling security as a product, you're selling your SOC team. And whenever I like to use deadlines, right? Some people call them SLAs or stuff like that. The time to detect and react to an alert essentially from this company. And I've seen some people have some outrageous requests like, oh, I want all of my quote unquote critical alerts to be 30 seconds and less to be analyzed and closed out. And people that are buying security, they don't understand what that means. Are you just wanting a quick check in those 30 seconds? If so, you're not going to have 100% guarantee that all of the resources are looked at this. And then also what quantifies a critical, right? How much impact to the business is that going to be? Because I've seen people that are like, oh, everything is on fire. Everything's a dumpster fire. Whenever you get it treated as high. And I'm like, no, that's not how it works, because then you lose the value add to these alerts and the actual severity that they might bring. Because now we're using unauthorized login as the same severity as ransomware, right? No, two drastically different types of threats. And everyone's just like, no, we gotta treat it all the same because it could be ransom. I'm like, no. So, just kind of putting yourselves in the shoe, how much time do you want your SOC analysts to truly be investigating these alerts? Because again, right, the salespeople, they don't understand how long it takes for data to load in a SIM and correlate different indexes and data points and reviewing playbooks and making sure the proper escalations are contacted. And then, of course, you got customer tickets. And then most of the time, those analysts might be handling more than one customer. And then you don't want data leakage because they're working so fast. It's a whole storm of stress on the back end that a lot of people do not think about whatsoever.
That's you're spot on there, and it's interesting because, like, when I think about from a sales perspective or even a service development perspective, like that's why we always we predefine those, right? Like you going to the client, I'm going to the client. I'm like, here's what our service, here's what our SLAs are, here's our deadlines, here's what that means, right? Here's how we define that, and it's something I've talked about before with other people. It's like one of the biggest problems I see in managed services is that the contracts are really big and complicated. The sales cycle is really long. So once it finally gets there, both the CISO and the salespeople, they just want it to be done, right?
Yep.
And they both make these assumptions about the other side. And so I assume you're looking at things this way and that way, and I assume you're going to notify me via email, phone, and text, and but unless you actually sit down and read through all of that stuff with the salesperson and go back and forth and make sure that that's actually what you signed up for and you're paying for.
Yeah. and then like another thing, and like working on the defense side, you have to stay in trend with current events. It doesn't matter, right? Because malware, APTs, their tactics forever change. What I read yesterday is probably not even applicable what I read 2 hours ago.
Wow.
And one of the things I have seen reoccurring, I would say within the last 4 or 5 months, is people that have third-party services, and those third-party services get breached. And it has been the news with Amazon recently. I think Disney also had some old services running a backend. I mean, it is all over, especially with Black Friday. People like to exploit those third-party libraries that they use for JavaScript. And so what people are missing in these scenarios is, hey, if I'm selling my SOC as a service, what are you providing to us? Like, are you using a third-party e-commerce page for all of your inventory management and stuff like that? Or are you using a different backend application that's hosted somewhere else so they can handle all the GDPR questions and stuff like that? So if those companies get compromised and you're selling security as a service and they find that company gets compromised, that is a whole slew of different, in my opinion, escalations, contracts, what I would say confidentiality at that point, because now you're kind of going into a different area. But, it's just another thing to think about as we talk about what is SOC, right? What is their scope? And there's a lot of scope creep that can happen on those service levels.
Yeah, I wouldn't, I definitely have had clients, ask about monitoring the third parties, and because that's again another thing they want to know that you're looking at everything inside and outside, full attack surface, visibility, assets, all of that stuff, and like, that's great, but you didn't pay for that, and you don't even have a third party risk program in place. Like, just us monitoring is not going to be enough, right? So being able to, which is interesting. So I want to talk about that a little bit too. Is as we talk about that scope creep, or like how the SOC functions, how does it work with the other areas of security? Or do you feel like you're just isolated sometimes?
Yeah. And again, right, this might depend on the business side. I've worked at places where I was also managing a SIM SOAR and doing detection engineering and everything else, right? And then also at the end of the day, I'm lucky to come home and make dinner. Like, you have all these different hats. And then, of course, working in bigger companies, you might have the flexibility of having these different resources, right? You can have a dedicated team that manages your antivirus. You might have a dedicated team that does security awareness and all this other stuff. So it just really depends on the company and base itself. Now, when I'm talking about like setting up a SOC from the ground up, I always ask people, what is in your environment currently? Or do you have an antivirus? Do you have people managing firewalls? Like, what defense in depth is already in place? If you don't have anything, then, let's back off for a second and have a different conversation before we just let the train leave the station here. But a lot of the times, people already have these baseline security mechanics in place. And I always say, if you're starting a SOC very, very young, very mature, or I guess immature in this instance, look at the out-of-the-box alerts that these appliances have, because now you're teaching your team lay of the land, right? What is expected, what is not expected, and really harden the out-of-the-box alerts, and then start scope creeping a little bit more. And then this is where we start talking about behavioral analytics. And so a lot of the times when you see security vendors promote, hey, we have machine learning and AI, it's really important to understand what those are.
Right.
And a lot of the times I feel like people that don't understand that language, they get so I would say shiny object syndrome. They're like, oh, I want this device because it has these acronyms and these buzzwords. And I was like, let's slow down, right? And so when I talk about that next level of responsibility, we have our out-of-the-box alerts, but now we're going more into that behavioral analysis. And this is where that MITRE ATT&CK framework comes into play as well, because now you're understanding tactics and how specific groups might behave, or a specific malicious family might behave. And now you can start correlating these risks to create a bigger picture of a different type of risk landscape. And so when people are bringing in, machine learning and AI tools, again, it's important to know what it is AI using the existing data that's already being fed into it? If it is, then now we're more talking on the machine learning landscape. Right. So finding different correlations of the existing data to identify anomalies, such as people logging in at different times of the day, or exporting large amount of data, which they might not normally do, or browsing to websites that are typically not in the geolocation of that company. So that's where machine learning comes in as well. But as they kind of go through these different things, it's always a thought in the back of your mind, which is what I kind of talked about earlier, is understanding the change of the threat landscape happening in the community. It's really important to be engaged, be involved in things like this podcast, or, follow threat researchers, because your security tools are only going to detect and block with the threats that they've known to scan historically. And so when you get these new emerging threats, obviously it's going to bypass, things are going to happen. And again, that's why we have jobs. AI is not going to fix everything, at least for right now, right? So I feel like I have some sense of job stability for a little bit. But this is where we go into detection engineering and threat hunting. So detecting specific behaviors that are rooted to the foundation of how that malware might behave or how that APT might behave. And then this is where a concept called pyramid of pain comes in. So starting from the bottom where, your IOC, so your IPs and hashes, things that can easily be blocked. And then as you go up that pyramid, detecting and alerting on specific behaviors. So that really can help guide the responsibilities of a SOC team, because most of the time when you start creating and blocking these alerts, this is where you start finding things like, oh, this developer has port 22 open on their SQL server. Should they probably have that to the external internet? No. Okay, why do they have it? Oh, it's for XYZ work. And then that's where you start finding different risk and business impact. And maybe you go down to the agent level, like, hey, my antivirus agent was taking too much memory and CPU, so I just disabled it. And you're like, no, right? So what can we do to what can we do to make
that?
Right. And it blows my mind. Or people that are like, oh, I don't want MFA. MFA is inconvenient. Everything is inconvenient. Like me putting on my seatbelt, or the fact I don't have remote start on my car and there's 6 inches of snow outside. That's inconvenient. Like, I'm not saying don't wear your seatbelt or anything, but again, right, there's a reason why we have these security mechanics in place, is for, the benefit of you as well. Because if I didn't have my seatbelt and I hit a curb, I'm glad I had my seatbelt at, those types of things. That's why we're here. First responders.
That's funny. I just had a conversation with somebody about like things I'm excited for next year, and I was like, or this year now.
Yeah.
And I was like, MFA by default. Like, I think a lot of people have realized that, like, no, we need, like, we're actually going to have secure by design be a thing now.
I was laughing so hard when Apple had rolled out their built-in password key, and it just automatically generates passwords for you. And it's so ironic that a lot, like, for example, a lot of like mom and pop shops where I sign in, their password strength is so weak that I can't use my password key that Apple recommends is a strong password on these mom and pop websites. And I'm just like, oh, I was like, should I? I was like, no, I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not going to email, but it's crazy to think that. And then of course, now Microsoft's like, nah, you're going to get MFA. Yep. I don't care,
Well, that's the only way they were ever going to get it. Cause especially the small mid-market, because they, we finally get it up and running when we want to go off and do our work. We don't bother tweaking it or turning it, which is kind of, because you mentioned something and made me think about it. So is threat intelligence like absolutely critical to a SOC? Is it a must-have then?
It kind of depends on the organization and business you're working with and how you're using those threat intelligent pieces. Are you using it to ensure that maybe specific assets or data information in your company isn't seen elsewhere? Like, hey, have I been pwned.com, right? My email address from when I was a student on there, absolutely all over the place. Like those credentials are flying. Now, to be fair, and this email address does not exist anymore. Password 123 was a really good password when I was a college student, not learning cybersecurity at the time. But, threat intelligence can also be a really beneficial thing, right? Such as, hey, has this been seen historically? Has this hash maybe been seen elsewhere in the environment? Or, hey, we have seen a rise of this specific threat actor group doing these types of behaviors, or seeing, targeting these types of industries. And again, you don't have to pay, in my opinion, especially if you're starting right out of the box. There's some really good threat intel services out there,
right,
and really good threat intel feeds that are amazing. But for people that are starting, that detection engineering or that threat hunting, it's hard to justify those for I would say alert creation reasons. And again, it can be very expensive, but a lot of the times this is where going on to X and Reddit, and it might be a more manual process, but you can start correlating those trends as well. And I also recommend people to work with your security vendors as well. If you work with a specific company for your antivirus, I guarantee you they probably have a threat intel team that is looking at these trends that they could probably share some information with you, or at least a monthly threat report. And it's something that a lot of companies on the security side, I have been seeing as like part of their package as well now. Because again, they're the people sending signature updates to your agents. They probably most likely know at least a general area as to what's targeting similar industries like you or a rise of trend like this. And then they can convey that information. And that's also, in my opinion, one of the most amazing things about being part of this community is the collaboration as well.
Sure.
There's so many Discord channels out there. At least like here in Kansas City, there's a lot of communication with people that are like, hey, we've seen this type of rise, we've seen this type of threat, we've seen, you know, this happening, or hey, I'm not sure if you guys have noticed this. And so it's really, really nice. And that's also another free tool that I recommend for people wanting to get involved with that is get connected with your community, step one, because everyone shares information.
That's super useful, because I think, you know, look at a lot of MSPs who are trying to get into the security market, and they're like, well, okay, we can manage a SIM, or we'll get a low cost SIM solution, or we'll, you know, just, you know, kind of look at some things manually. But, you know, being able to offer something like threat intelligence and just put a body behind it, you know, that can, a person who can, you know, use that information and take it. That's a good set. What other things do you think are sort of critical to like base?
I would say I could talk for an hour about what SOC is talking. So minus the alerts, right? There's two aspects. If we're talking about a leadership perspective, right? So people managing and running a team, data and how you use that data can really benefit your security operations program. And I'm not just talking about SOC. I'm talking about broad generics, right? And there's so many times I've heard conversations where people are like, oh, my C-suite doesn't care, my XYZ doesn't care. Like, how do I get past that and make a personable impression? And my best advice is your security team, whether it's the SOC finding this alert and you're working with a developer team that's probably has a vulnerability and they won't patch it and it's just grinding gears the entire time, set up a tabletop with this team. Set up a tabletop and invite those C-suite people. And it's intimidating, don't get me wrong, but having transparent communication to the actual threats that can happen and putting a dollar sign behind this opens eyes. I went to a conference one time and I had a guy come up to me and I was actually talking about similar topics like this. And the guy came up to me and he goes, I could not get past this team. They did not want to patch the e-commerce platform we use. And like the C-suite didn't care. So I essentially did a tabletop, except I did a live fire pen test as the tabletop. And I was like, you woke up and chose violence that day. Because I didn't care. He's all like, either this was going to like work or I'm out because I can't work for a company like this. And I'm all like, okay, good for you. And he told me, he goes, yeah, so I basically pwned my company's website and under 5 minutes obtained admin and was able to dump XYZ data. And I was like, okay. And he goes, yeah. He goes, when I tell you my CEO's jaw dropped, it dropped. And he goes, that server was patched that same day after we got done. And he goes, and now I am first name basis with that guy. And I was like, good for you, I guess.
That is the theory of conceptual change. It's something I talk about a lot when it comes to education. And the example in like psychology that they use is like, you can tell a kid the world is round and they're like, okay, I get it. Until you show them a globe and they go, oh, I get it. The world is round.
It's round. Yep.
So I can tell you, I can get your email, but they're like, oh yeah, sure you can. But then when you stand in a room full of them and then you open up their email on a screen and they're in the audience, they're like, you can't, that's I get it.
Like you hear pins drop. And like another, like one thing I always want to promote, and especially like people listening to this and they're like, oh, I'm going to go hack my CEO's inbox after
No, don't.
No, that's not the point we're trying to make. It's the transparent communication. And one of the key things I have learned in my career that also drives solutions is going, okay, now that we found this issue, however you present it, these are recommendations that we can implement that can take this long. That would be this business impact. And this is where it is key to sell that, because that is what a developer cares about, is the impact that's going to happen to the business and their little product child that they have developed months and months on. And then for them to be told it's an ugly baby, like it doesn't feel good to anyone. But having that good, transparent communication absolutely goes a long way. even like things that are business critical, I've had to sell the fact of, if this goes down, it is not good news for you either. Yeah. Like, I'm just gonna be honest with you on that. And I was like, I know you enjoy seeing my charming face at 7:30 in the morning, but do not want to be on a phone call with you until 9 p.m. at night, because I am not a happy bear. I was like, I get hungry really fast. And
That's great. Yeah, you do. You have to have that, like you said, that transparency. And I always try to find a way to tell stories, to like, explain it to them. And I mean, not everybody's good at that. And it's funny because I was, again, doing another podcast on like leadership and becoming insecurity. And I'm like, that's the thing you have to learn how to do, is you have to learn to talk to different people in their languages and become a translator for security to them and explain it to them. So I love the tabletop idea. This has been awesome. Reanna, I could talk to you for hours, I'm sure, and probably will at some point. But where can everybody find you on the interwebs?
Yeah, and I'll definitely send you links to my socials if you want to include them in the description. But I'm very active on LinkedIn. You can find me by looking up Reanna Schultz. I'm also on X as Cyber Reanna, and Blue Sky, and don't quote me on this one because I don't know my user handle as well, but I believe it's just Reanna Schultz on Blue Sky. And of course, I always promote people. If you want me to be on your podcast, I love collaborating with you guys. You can reach out to me on there as well. So yeah.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thanks for enjoying Keyboard Samurai Podcast. If you'd like to engage, find Will on LinkedIn at /WillClue or visit at willclue.me. That's WILKLU.me for more info. Disconnecting now. Synac you later.